Hello students, this is a video lecture that I'm doing, goes along with chapter 16 from the Mindich textbook. I'm going to talk about ethics related to media work and also different forms of bias in the news. In the textbook, chapter 16 covers media law. I already covered that in a separate video lecture. So this is just about ethics and media bias. Here we go. And we're off. Ethics, according to the textbook, I'm looking at the textbook now, it says it on page 309, ethics are moral principles about what is good for individuals and society. Okay, ethics are basically what it comes down to, moral principles. And what I'm going to talk about here are ethics as they relate to work in the media, specifically journalism. Not every media outlet is responsible and has some sort of like ethical standards. Most major media outlets, certainly most major professional media outlets, have uh, codes of conduct that can guide their journalists as to what they should and should not be doing. You should not accept gifts for reviews, for example. You should not pay for interviews. You know, there are disreputable organizations that will do that, but that is not something reputable journalists should do. And in the textbook, uh, Mindich presents something from the film Men in Black, which maybe some of y'all or many of y'all have seen, where they talk about supermarket tabloids. Supermarket tabloids are those things that typically, you know, when you're checking out, they have sleazy stories about sex scandals and space aliens and things like that. My favorite was always Weekly World News. Weekly World News was my favorite of those. We typically look down at those, but in Men in Black, which is a comedy, the tabloids are presented as sort of like paragons of virtue and bastions of investigative journalism.
These are the hot sheets.
Best investigative reporting on the planet. Go ahead, read the New York Times if you want to. They get lucky sometimes. Thanks, Manny.
Cannot believe you're looking for tips in the supermarket tabloids.
Not looking for. Found.
Quality news outlets show a strong reverence and should show a strong reverence for the facts. And there is something called the Society of Professional Journalists, SPJ, which does have a very clear code of ethics. Seek truth and report it. That's kind of like one of the big overarching principles. I'm not going to read all of these. I think I'll post this on Canvas, but take a look at some of the bullet points. Journalists take responsibility for the accuracy of their work. Verify information before releasing it. Verify information before releasing it. Now, we have the situation in the United States where journalists do not need a license. This has become because of the First Amendment. We do not license journalists. So if you were to violate the SPJ code of ethics, you might lose your job, but you're not going to lose your license because we do not license journalists. Now, ethics, one way of describing ethics would be just because you can report something doesn't mean you should. Okay, just because it's legal to report something doesn't mean it's necessarily the good idea. For example, here's a question. You know, imagine you're a TV news producer. You obtain video of U.S. soldiers committing war crimes. Would you air this video? There's no right or wrong answer there. Okay, would you air this video? That question, hypothetical question, relates to this famous incident from 1965 in Vietnam. Morley Safer, who was a reporter at the time for CBS News, was traveling with some US soldiers who come across a village in Vietnam. They feel like there's no enemy combatants there. It's just a bunch of old people and some children and some women. They feel like this village has been providing aid and comfort to the Viet Cong, the sort of the guerrilla fighters that we were fighting against. And so, as a way of removing the aid and comfort from the enemy, they burned down the village. They burned down the village. They were not under fire. They were not attacked. They did not see anyone with guns there. So it looks as if U.S. soldiers are burning down the homes of these peaceful, innocent Vietnamese people. And CBS and Morley Safer were criticized for airing this video because it didn't make U.S. soldiers look very good. And this has led to a very, very famous phrase. Some of you may have heard it. So, we had to burn down the village in order to save it. Yeah, that's essentially what they were doing. They were trying to burn down the village in order to save the country. Now, the textbook presents in this chapter several different kinds of bias. I'm not going to read each and every one of these to you because y'all are intelligent. You made it this far in college, but I'm putting them in the video lecture as a way to emphasize that this material is important, and I would encourage you to read it from the textbook. There are different kinds of bias that can affect news reporting, and news reporting is not biased because there's some grand overarching enemy villain, like a group of people smoking cigars in a backfilled room who say this is the story of the day, we are going to attack this candidate, we're going to praise this candidate. That's not the way bias works. There's different forms of bias because we're all humans and we all have sort of like unconscious bias that we're not even aware of. But the way media organizations are structured and organized can lead to certain kinds of bias, and Mendich does a very, very good job of identifying some of the specific kinds of bias that you can see, including corporate bias, big city bias. There can be a bias towards authority figures, right? We're going to trust the police because the police are voice of authority. The police may have their own agenda, and the police report could be wrong, okay? Sometimes people want to embrace change just because they think change is good and change is inherently positive. There can be a centrist bias. We want to present both sides of the story, even though there may not be two sides to a story. Okay, if there's a protest and there's 100 people on one side and 100 people on the other side of the street, one of those groups of protesters could be funded by some corporation who are just out there because they were paid to be out there. That's not really two equal sides. Okay, there can be a patriotic bias. We're going to believe the United States no matter what, even if sometimes the United States does things that are maybe not the best things in the world. We have the spin room bias, and this is what most cable news is about, is like people trying, and politicians coming on cable news trying to say the specific bullet point, talking point of the day. And then we have horse race bias. Okay, this is worth me going over. When journalists cover political campaigns, they cover them like a sporting event. One side is up, one side's down. This poll says this poll says that, rather than actually go into the merits of a candidate's position and talk about anything of substance. What is this politician actually going to do to address this issue, and will their solution work? It becomes much more who's up, who's down. This doesn't really help people make an informed decision. Now we have this issue of digital photo editing. How much is too much? I think it's understood that there's some type of manipulation, cropping, color adjustment that's normal, that would be acceptable. We all do a little bit of this, especially when we take selfies on social media to make ourselves look as best as we can. But what's an acceptable level of photo manipulation? And should viewers know to what degree a photo has been altered? How many would understand? And this also applies to the growing use of artificial intelligence. If artificial intelligence has been used to enhance an image or to tell a story in any way, it should be acknowledged. But is it always acknowledged? And does intentionally making changes in a photo change this viewer's response to the image? Okay, and I have a couple of examples here that I will go over that relate to this issue of ethics. 1994, very famous case, O.J. Simpson. These two magazine covers. O.J. Simpson at the time was accused of murdering his ex-wife. There was another gentleman, I think Ron Goldman was the other guy who kind of got caught up in this. This was a huge case. I cannot overemphasize how big of a media spectacle this was. This is the mugshot taken with O.J. Simpson, who started off as a famous football player and then became a Hollywood actor. The photo on the left, Time magazine, has digitally altered the cover. They said they just were trying to enhance the contrast to make a more stark image. Newsweek presents something closer to the original mugshot, although I'm sure Newsweek did some type of photo manipulation as well. So the photo on the left by Time magazine, they've made OJ look darker. This ties into some long-standing and unfortunate racist beliefs we have in the United States about black men being scary. They've made him look darker, making him look scarier, making him look more ominous. Um, was that done? Was that motivated even a little bit by racism? Probably, probably. And yeah, it was a big, big embarrassment for Time magazine, especially since Newsweek chose the exact same mugshot for their cover and did not alter it, or at least did not alter it in the same way. Here we have this famous photograph from Iwo Jima. This is from the end of World War II. Now, maybe some of you have seen this photograph or maybe seen the statue. There's a statue of this in Washington, D.C. This is not digital photo manipulation, but this is an example of a photograph being staged. Here's the original photograph. Here's the original photograph, okay? And the way I understand it was that the photographer saw this photo, wasn't really happy with the way it looked, the framing, the cropping. So he goes back the next day and gets some soldiers, not even the same. It's not even the same group of soldiers. And he basically directs them to reenact this raising of the flag. This is now one of the most iconic photographs in American history. Super patriotic. You know, I remember growing up, this is great, you know. Um, is it unethical? It's certainly in a gray area. Is it unethical? It's based on a real event, but it's a staged photograph. Here we have, now this is back in the pre-digital era. This is an example of photo manipulation from the original era of photography. This is from the era of the Civil War. The photo on the left has been altered to add that general, that guy sitting there. You can see him on the right side of the image there. He's not in the original, not in the original. So people have been altering photographs way, way before computers and digital technology. Here we have Mussolini, fascist leader of Italy during World War II. The original photograph is on the right. Mussolini wants himself to look more macho, you know, like he's a heroic leader waving a sword on a horse, doesn't want it to look like someone's actually, you know, holding the horse there. Stalin, who was the ruler of the Soviet Union for many years, Stalin was known for rewriting history. And this photograph shows up a lot when anyone is ever talking about, if ever a news story is talking about someone altering history for political purposes, this is the photograph that they use. The gentleman on the right side of the image there fell out of favor with Stalin and then gets airbrushed out of all the later photos. Here we have manipulation done by the magazine The Economist in 2010. There was this massive oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. The photo on the right is the original photograph. I guess The Economist thought it would look better to have President Obama standing there looking seriously by himself. So they removed the other individuals for the photograph. This was an embarrassment. This was considered too much. This was considered too much. And now this guy lost his job over this. This is one where I differ. I say, come on now. That's what I would say. Come on now. That's the official academic response. Come on now. 2013, Syria. This is a photograph of a guy with a gun in Syria. Look, if you can look here, there's a camera in the photograph. So in the photo that's released, it's removed, kind of airbrushed out or whatever photo manipulation tools you can. This one doesn't seem that extreme to me, but this was considered too much photo manipulation and the photographer lost his job. Here we have a photograph from the 1970s. This again, back to the pre-digital era. College students on Kent State University in Ohio were protesting the Vietnam War. U.S. soldiers, I think it was probably National Guard, it was National Guard, actually fired and killed some people or killed at least one student protester. You know, famous, not positive, famous moment in U.S. history, but a famous moment in U.S. history nonetheless. This photograph has been reprinted endlessly. The photo on the right is the original photograph. It looks like that screaming woman has a pole coming out of her head. That pole is clearly in the background. That's in the background. But the way it's framed and just the vantage point of the photographer looks like it's coming out of her head. So the image that is reproduced more broadly is the one on the left, where someone has using simple tools to remove that from the image. Unethical. Yeah, again, I'm kind of say, come on, I think that's okay. You know, I don't think it changes too much, but if you were to do this today, you might lose your job for doing something like that today. And here we have Kate Middleton, member of the royal family. You know, I try not to keep up with the British royal family. You know, I try not to keep up with them, but I do remember when this photograph came out. Maybe some of y'all remember it as well. She had been out of the public for a while, out of the public spotlight for a while for undisclosed reasons. On Mother's Day, or at least the British equivalent of Mother's Day, she releases this photograph. And almost immediately, news outlets start to zero in. If you really look closely at certain portions of this, you can see strong evidence of photo manipulation, maybe the use of artificial intelligence. It looks like this is a composite image where they took a whole bunch of images of Kate Middleton and the kids and pasted them together to create an incident that never actually happened. Yeah, I think this was kind of extreme and a big embarrassment for the royal family. And I think ever since then, people are looking quite closely at any photograph that comes out of the British royal family. People saying, is this real or not? Kate, it was not a smart move to release that photograph. Now we have an image that appeared on the Fox News website. This was the summer when there was a pretty widespread serious protests. 2020, George Floyd had been murdered, and a lot of BLM protests were going on. This is a composite of two different images. The image on the left says you are now entering Free Cap Hill. That's one photograph. Then you have this guy on the right wearing a COVID mask and a gun. That's a different photograph pasted together. The idea was that conservative media, exemplified by Fox News, said this zone of Seattle had been taken over by Antifa and anarchists, and it was completely lawless, and they were guarding it with guns, and there was no law and order whatsoever. Was a gross exaggeration. This photograph, which actually looks fake if you look at it, but this photograph is not acknowledged as being a composite. It's just presented as here's what's going on. Unethical thing to do. Here we have this is a tweet now, a little bit old, from Deborah Messing. She was an actress on the TV show Will and Grace, if any of you know that. Puts out this social media image comparing Trump to Hitler. Kind of a classic metaphor. That's not a real photograph, okay? The original photo, this is the original photograph of Hitler on the right. He's not holding a book. A book has been added to his hand to make the analogy between Trump and Hitler a little stronger. Okay. In a previous video lecture, I talked about the need for media literacy, and I urged everyone in JMS 200 to be very careful before you post images on social media or information on social media in general. Do not be the kind of person who reposts false information. I don't think Deborah Messing got that message. Okay. She's reposting false information here. Now I have a couple of unethical mistakes, just sort of textbook things. Either they're in the textbook or not, but something you should be aware of. Dan Rather was a long time journalist at CBS News. He did this big news report about former President Bush, claiming that he had avoided Vietnam draft by manipulating, his family influence. The documents that were shown to prove that Bush had avoided the draft unfairly. The documents were fake. The documents had not been properly vetted. And this was a big embarrassment for Dan Rather, seriously damaged his career. And unfortunate because the guy had a pretty long, successful career. Pretty unfortunate that he fell victim to this. Or maybe he was so much against, for his own political beliefs, he wanted the story to be true. He didn't take time to fact check it. Now we have the Matt Drudge, Lewinsky, and Clinton story. I do remember when this happened. I was already an adult. The story was, now this is an interesting story, okay? The story was that President Bill Clinton had been having an affair with an intern, Monica Lewinsky. That was the story. Matt Drudge came out with a story not alleging that it's true. Matt Drudge said, hey, Newsweek has information about Clinton and Lewinsky. Newsweek is afraid to publish it because Newsweek can't verify it. I'm going to go ahead and publish. So think about that. The story ultimately did prove to be true. Ultimately, the story was true. But what Matt Drudge reported was Newsweek is not reporting the story. Newsweek is not reporting the story. Newsweek doesn't feel comfortable doing it. Newsweek is not going forward. I'm going forward with it. Is that an ethical thing to do? I would say no. Whether or not the story is true, that was secondary. We didn't know that until later. But I don't think you should go ahead and publish a story saying one of my colleagues, one of my rivals is afraid to publish it because they can't verify the truth. If that person can't verify the truth, maybe that person is doing their job. So this is an interesting, I think it was an ethical mistake by Matt Drudge, but the story ultimately was true. 1992 NBC show Dateline does a story about GM trucks that are prone to explosions. Apparently, the trucks did have some type of problem and could explode. However, to make the story better, NBC stupidly put like explosives in the trucks so it would be more horrific and more graphic and blow up on cue. Huge embarrassment for NBC. Okay, you could report a safety problem with the car. Don't have to like use Hollywood special effects to make something up that never happened. Now we have a story from 2023. Female reporter basically confessed that she made up stories, which, maybe you think sports journalism is not that important. I think it is important because sports is such a huge, massive, thriving industry and has such massive social and cultural influence that I think people who cover it should obey ethics just like everybody else. But when coaches are walking off the field or going into the locker room at halftime, whatever they say is usually just like nonsensical boilerplate stuff. Oh, we need to try harder. We need to score more points. We need to play better defense, whatever. She just made up quotes and attributed them to coaches, which again is something you absolutely, absolutely not do. And another unfortunate thing about this too was that not only did it make her look bad, but it makes women reporters look bad as well. There's this long-standing belief, which is not fair, very misogynistic, that women have no business covering male sports. When this story came out, it just kind of added fuel to that, seeing like, see, she shouldn't have been there anyway. She shouldn't have been there anyway. So sports should be covered ethically, should be covered honestly, and do not make up stories and attribute them to people. And now we have an incident that happened right here on campus. I was teaching this class. I was also teaching the law and ethics class when this happened. And me and all my journalism colleagues were kind of aghast that this happened. Here's a story, if you don't remember it. There's video posted on social media of 4 young women. This was here on campus near VA House Arena, harassing a food vendor at night. They appear to be sorority girls. And I don't mean to stereotype, no offense to anyone who isn't a sorority, but when a group of you get together, you have a look. Sometimes we can tell, yeah, that's a sorority. They're harassing this guy, picking at his food. He's telling him to stop. They're just kind of being obnoxious. It seemed like drunk, obnoxious college students to me. It seems like drunk, obnoxious college students. Video is posted on social media, identifying the students, saying they're SDSU students. Here's the sorority they go to. Cancel them or whatever. We should cancel these people. The Daily Aztec, our own student newspaper, chooses to repost the video and report on the story because I guess it was a social media thing. Everyone on campus was talking about it. They give the names. They were wrong. Whoever made that original social media post trying to call out these women was mistaken. They gave the wrong names. So then they weren't even SDSU students. They were students from some other university. So the SDSU students have a legitimate case now to potentially sue the Daily Aztec that you defamed us. You put our names out there in a non-positive way when it was not true, when it was absolutely not true. And yeah, it's unfortunate. It goes back to verify information. I'm not saying social media is less reputable than other outlets. I'm just saying you should verify everything, especially stuff you get on social media. So do not fall into this trap. Okay, the end. And can you see? I got this from Professor Nee. I have the Time magazine and I have Ta-da. The end.